Her sword matched any man's savagery. That's a pretty good way to describe Jiri of Jarel. Written by C.L. Moore. Jiri was one of the first female sword and sorcery heroines. And I read the first short story she ever appeared in, The Black God's Kiss. This stuff is weird, man. Very, very weird. New Edge Sword and Sorcery, who published a brand new short story starring her, described it as Alice in Wonderland with a big fucking sword. I like that description. Jiri is a warrior woman who rules over a small dominion in what is medieval France. Black God's Kiss is about her castle getting overrun by a villainous snake, Guillaume. And Jiri, to get revenge on Guillaume, travels to hell! Like actual hell. I always knew hell would be in France. The sequence where Jiri enters hell is where C.L. Moore really stretches her writing chops. It is a surreal cavalcade of intense and terrifying imagery. It's really quite something to read because it doesn't feel like hell as like just fire and stuff. It feels like the outside of what the human mind can even comprehend. Moore and her husband, Harry Cutter, were both part of H.P. Lovecraft's circle. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and hope that they weren't as intense about some stuff as H.P. Lovecraft was. But the formless, unknowable hellscape that Jiri enters really feels Lovecraftian to me. The story concludes with Jiri making a deal with a demon, and she successfully kills Guillaume. And the payment for killing Guillaume is that as he dies, Jiri will fall in love with him. Now, the character of Guillaume is awful, a terrible, horrible individual. And fair warning, like trigger warning here, Guillaume does assault her at the beginning of the book. I don't know how I totally feel about the ending, but I do think it's an interesting ending. And it is an interesting way to deal with hell by making her fall in love with the worst man in the world. Keeping that sort of ickiness in mind, I really do suggest diving into these stories. At times it almost feels like you're reading poetry, and it's hard to get over how innately fun these sorts of things are. Recommend from me. I know what you mean. Red Sonja really is a hard person to place in the Conan mythos. Because a lot like Schrodinger's paradox, Robert E. Howard both did and didn't create her. Let's get something clear. A character called Red Sonja appears in a Robert E. Howard story called The Shadow of the Vulture. It's a historical fantasy about the siege of Vienna. Red Sonja comes from a comic adaptation of Conan the Barbarian. What they would do is when they ran out of Conan stories, they would take anything appropriate, like a lot of Cole's stories, and just rewrite them into Conan stories. And that's what they did with Shadow of the Vulture. Red Sonja turns into Red Sonja. I know, it's strange, right? So Howard created a Red Sonja, wrote the original story that Red Sonja comes from, but didn't create Red Sonja. I had an idea last night for what I think would be a really fun show. I really wanted to make a sitcom about the running of an asylum-style studio. Mockbuster people. They make stuff like Transmorphers, The Almighty Thor, Ape versus Mecha Ape, Tom Arnold, oh my god, and their crown jewel, Sharknado. I got really excited about it. It could be like the main character would be like this delusional but really enthusiastic guy about film. He might not be a good filmmaker, but he loves film so much. Then you could have like a real serious sort of artiste guy who's fallen on hard times. Then you could have like an actress who, even though these movies are garbage, she takes them seriously because she respects the craft too darn much. And then maybe you could do them in like a mockumentary. And I just created demo reel, didn't I? Dang it!
What's a video game that you know will never exist, but you would pay so much money to see happen?
I would really like Paradox to make a pro wrestling game. Now, as a person who spends an inordinate amount of his life playing Crusader Kings 3, and as a person who also spends an inordinate amount of his life thinking about pro wrestling, there's part of me that would really like the two combined. But like, I think it could work. I think it could work. It's not about like the actual matches themselves. No, 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 no. You're like the equivalent of the booker. You are promoting a wrestling federation as it travels around the country and nay, even the world. And your job is to slowly but surely expand your federation into one of the greatest, most powerful federations in the world. I think you should start like in the 70s in the territory area and slowly develop from there. And maybe there's like a touring mechanic like the stuff they've been doing lately in Crusader Kings with like pilgrimages and the parties and stuff like that. I think it could work. I really think it could work. And it lets you get like intensely involved with your characters' lives. And I would play that nonstop. That would be my life, I guess. I would die in this chair. There's a good chance I'm going to die in this chair, anyways. Now, if you're asking about classic, underrated pulp fiction, can I present to you Robots Have No Tails? These are a collection of short stories that follow Gallagher, a genius scientist with a strange quirk. He does his best inventing while near blackout drunk. That means he often wakes up with these inventions that he has no idea what they do or how they work or what purpose he built them for. And often his life is a total disaster caused by whatever he did while he was drunk. I love these stories, and I've been trying to sell people on them forever. The best way to think of them is essentially they're a proto Rick and Morty, although Gallagher is a much nicer person than Rick. I have a spurious unresearched notion that the main inspiration was the Thin Man. These stories are over the top wildness. Now, Lewis Paget doesn't exist, that's a pseudonym. But two authors use Harry Cutter and C.L. Moore. Yes, they were married. But according to C.L. Moore, this was mainly Cutter's idea. Sometimes being a critic is proselytizing for underappreciated gems, and I'm really trying to proselytize for this. Reading the excellent Helen of Winterhorn really made me think about how much affection I really do have for the Conan the Barbarian stuff. It's strange. Conan is a foundational text in the fantasy genre, but I feel it doesn't really get talked about anymore. Conan the Barbarian first comes out in the 30s, and Howard pretty much published consistently 20 years. And Lord of the Rings is more of a creature of the 50s and 60s. To be fair, The Hobbit was published in the 30s, but The Hobbit, although a hit, was not the massive culture-inducing shift that Lord of the Rings was. Before we get any further into this, I want it to be known I love Lord of the Rings. I have toured the New Zealand filming sites. Conan to me probably represents the pinnacle of pre-Tolkien fantasy. Conan also represents a type of fantasy we don't see anymore, really. Like, Conan didn't do, like, long, big, epic book series. The Conan mythos are told through episodic short stories. And I love that idea so much. Think about it, being able to read a fantasy story in one sitting. Wouldn't that be nice? Say this, as much as I have affection for it and Robert E. Howard's whole oeuvre, there are grossly dated aspects of it. But I love the good stuff, and any of the bad stuff I just want to write better versions of. They plan to break into the tower and rob the very jewel. And are they successful? Do they break into the tower? Yes, of course they do. And when Conan eventually breaks into the tower, Conan finds an elephant-headed man. One of the things they talk about a lot with Conan the Barbarian and Robert E. Howard's work in general, Conan the Barbarian has a lot of connections to the Cthulhu mythos. Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft were friendly with each other, and they exchanged a lot of letters, and tragically also agreed on certain things. The elephant-headed Yag is a celestial being who has been alive for millions of years and has seen the great fall and evolution of the human race. He also yearns for death. The evil sorcerer Yara has imprisoned Yag for thousands of years, and Yag enlists Conan to help him enact his final vengeance. Conan the Barbarian is a weird series chronologically. The author, Robert E. Howard, didn't write it in a straight line. In fact, the first short story is, in fact, a King Conan story. The real first one that people generally suggest you start with is The Elephant Tower. It involves a young Conan who has just entered the civilized world of Zemuria. In the city, he learns of a great and powerful jewel called the Heart of the Elephant that sits in the middle of a grand and bejeweled tower ruled over by an evil sorcerer named Yara. Conan first learns about this from a slave trader talking shit at a bar. After Conan asks about it and the slave trader kind of humiliates him, don't worry, the slave trader gets killed. Conan, with a mix of pride and alcohol, decides he will rob the Heart of the Elephant. There, in what is a tradition for Conan the stories, he runs into Theseus, Prince of Thieves, who also plans to rob the Heart of the Elephant. They plan to break into the tower and rob the very jewel. And are they successful? Do they break into the tower? Yes, of course they do. And when Conan eventually breaks into the tower, Conan finds an elephant-headed man. One of the things they talk about a lot with Conan the Barbarian and Robert E. Howard's work in general, Conan the Barbarian has a lot of connections to the Cthulhu mythos. Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft were friendly with each other, and they exchanged a lot of letters, and tragically also agreed on certain things. The elephant-headed Yag is a celestial being who has been alive for millions of years and has seen the great fall and evolution of the human race. He also yearns for death. The evil sorcerer Yara has imprisoned Yag for thousands of years, and Yag enlists Conan to help him enact his final vengeance. You can see the influence that Conan the Barbarian really has, even in stuff you don't really think it has influence on. Doesn't this premise sound like the standard opening Dungeons and Dragons mission? There's a jewel tower in the distance, and you're going to break in and rob it because you want stuff. And then you, adventurer, get involved in a strange monster beyond your understanding. Heck, you might even listen to the description of this and say, oh, that sounds kind of cliche and boring. This was the thing that influenced those cliches. Solid recommendation from me, is all I'm saying. Solid recommendation. Reading the excellent Helen of Winterhorn really made me think about how much affection I really do have for the Conan the Barbarian stuff. It's strange. Conan is a foundational text in the fantasy genre, but I feel it doesn't really get talked about anymore. Conan the Barbarian first comes out in the 30s, and Lord of the Rings is more of a creature of the 50s and 60s. To be fair, The Hobbit was published in the 30s, but The Hobbit, although a hit, was not the massive culture-inducing shift that Lord of the Rings was. Conan, to me, probably represents the pinnacle of pre-Tolkien fantasy. Type of fantasy we don't see anymore, really. Conan didn't do like long, big, epic book series. The Conan mythos are told through episodic short stories, and I love that idea so much. Think about it, being able to read a fantasy story in one sitting, wouldn't that be nice? Say this, as much as I have affection for it and Robert E. Howard's whole oeuvre, there are grossly dated aspects of it. But I love the good stuff, and any of the bad stuff I just want to write better versions of. In the middle of the night, I wrote this note down. I was convinced that this would be a good idea for a video, and it took me a second to remember what mouse on feet meant. It actually meant mouth on feet. It was the middle of the night, and I had the strangest conviction that my feet had a mouth on it, and I was desperately searching for the mouth on my feet. Then I remembered feet do not have mouths, faces have mouths. I thought I needed to remember this, so I woke up half groggily and dictated mouths on feet. This is what the actual note looked like, but you couldn't clearly see it. I felt that this was important for the people of the world to know. Peacemaker is one of the best things DC has produced in a long time. It's a weird spot. Peacemaker was a half-forgotten Charleston character. The most mainstream thing Peacemaker ever did was almost get killed in the opening chapters of Watchmen, before Alan Moore replaced him with the comedian. Big deal now. He's a name. He has mainstream value. He's a comedy character. This is very good for DC Comics because they want you to know that they no longer take their stuff as reverentially serious as they used to. Series called Peacemaker Tries Hard. Got the very first issue, which I found to be mostly successful. Peacemaker looks a lot like John Cena, and they're going with the tone and themes of the show. They're doing it actually pretty well. The issue is about Peacemaker finding a cute little dog at a crime scene, adopting it. The little dog gets kidnapped by the Brain. It's a pretty fun little series. The comedy hits more than it misses. It does feel like this is a little bit the setup to John Wick, but that's not a bad thing. I want this to work, DC. I don't like being negative. But I actually found the first 3 issues of this crossover series to be weirdly charming. It wasn't like something from 90s Vertigo, but it was a decently fun series, and I didn't regret reading it. To be known officially on record that I was decently positive about these comics. I don't know, there's something about this issue, the oodles of exposition, and the fact that there's 7 characters to keep track of, and these comics are relatively short, just, Listen, I'm a pretty bad artist myself, but the art is noticeably getting worse, and I don't know why. This image particularly, I just groaned at. It feels cheap, like the budget kind of dropped out. This line got a very legitimate chuckle from me. Everybody else is showing off their powers, and Bruce Wayne just has bad ears. There's something funny about how all the Ruby characters have these sort of absurd fantasy names, whereas the DC characters have kind of normal names. I don't know. It's not the worst comic I've ever read. It's pretty ragingly mediocre. I don't know. They're definitely going to do The Flash next. That's obviously what's going to happen. I might read that. The 14th issue of Love Everlasting is out. Jake the Cowboy has very much integrated into whatever is going on. Jake is struggling to get along with his co-workers, partly because there's a chance all his co-workers have the same motivation as him, but maybe also because weird, creepy murderer. Jake's problem, he's been too chatty. All Mother wants is for Jake to say his line, then shoot Joan. But he's been having trouble with that, especially because Joan remembered him. We do get some development on who the people occupying Joan's worlds are. It seems that they're both real and fictional at the same time. Still, no straight answer on what's going on in the series, but the big reveal has come up, and spoilers, we finally meet Joan's mother. Digression, comic book writers, if I could. Business plots are really boring, and I don't give a shit about them. I know there's a ton of superheroes who are CEOs of companies, but those scenes are boring and I hate them. Like Margin Call, if you can somehow ignore one of the cast members, is a very good movie. But the trick, I think, to writing a good business thriller is you probably have to have an understanding of how business works. But garbage like this, I just can't take. The product must be if it's not interesting and it doesn't take you inside of a unique world. Please, for the love of God, comic book writers, just drop this bullshit already. I don't need to see it anymore. CEO is a perfectly good job that explains why a superhero doesn't need to be at the office all the time. Unless you have a very good take on this, please do not do these scenes anymore, for my sake. I want you to all remember that this is a positive review. You ever wonder who Power Girl was? DC Comics used to do called Earth 2, which is where all the Golden Age versions of the superheroes lived. And Power Girl was an alternate version of Supergirl who was older. Earth 2 got destroyed, she's now in the regular DC universe. There was this brief attempt to recant her as an Atlantean, but that never stuck. DC brought back the Superman movie universe. DC seems to be more up for playing around with stuff like this. Batman 66 was set in the TV show universe, one with Adam West. And there's Wonder Woman 77, which is bringing back the continuity of the Wonder Woman TV show. I love that they're bringing this stuff back. I was always really snippy about the Batman TV show because Batman was serious. But as I've gotten older, I now appreciate that there's a wide variety of ways to enjoy your favorite superhero. Superman 77 starts in Metropolis. Clark buys Lois a hot dog and manages to stop a mugging in secret before disaster strikes as a mysterious alien robot attacks. Who could it be? It's Brainiac. Now, the original pitch for Superman 3 was to have the main villain be Brainiac. The pitch was, how to be diplomatic, awful. It sounded really bad. I can see why it wasn't made. Not that the third one was necessarily better, but oh my god, this one sounded bad. I'm excited to see where they take it, because I've always wondered why they never did more with this continuity.
When I asked if Transformers was real,
Fun fact, Transformers is actually real, because when my pet hamster, Little Sour Boy, broke his leg and had to be taken to the hospital, they eventually said he went to Cybertron to live with all the Transformers. So, the more you know. Sad? No. Little Sour Boy's out there in space, helping defend us from the Decepticons. Tell me, have you been menaced by Megatron and his cadre of toxic friends lately? No, I don't think so. I think we can all thank my childhood hamster for that. They never talk about that much in the movies and the comics and the TV shows, but Cybertron actually has a pretty robust system to help pets who suddenly got sick, dads who just needed to go out for a smoke, and moms who were just tired and need to sleep for a while. I don't know why they never include that. It's so strange. I draw, and now I don't consider myself necessarily the best artist in the world. I am a very enthusiastic trier. And the phrase I've coined describing my various art ventures is I'm an advanced beginner. It's been about 4 or 5 years being an advanced beginner, but I'm almost a beginner intermediate, you could say. I did this today, and I'd like to show you it. I want it to be known that these videos come out of pure ego. I finish a piece of art and I'm like, wow, that looks really good. I can finally show it off. But the second I have it up on camera and I'm looking at it through the eyes of a viewer, I go, oh God, people are actually going to see this. Now, usually I make pencil drawings with the mind to ink them later. I actually think that makes my pencil drawings a lot weaker because I don't focus on shading as much as I should. I tend to have this idea that, I'll just shade it when I ink it, and then I never get around to the inking part, and I constantly just keep doing pencil drawings. I didn't do that this time. I actually tried to make this an okay-looking pencil drawing by intentionally smudging it with my fingers. They were pretty dirty, but they've managed to clean themselves now, so the effect has been lost somewhat. I think in the context of my art, this turned out not that bad. I'm focusing more on freehand motions and fill and less on outlines. Obviously, it's not professional grade art in the way that, say, people would pay $1 million for and hang in the Louvre, which is, of course, the ultimate goal of every artist, to hang in the Louvre. But I'm trying to take victories where I can get them, and I'm pretty proud of this piece of work, even if it's not, say, the best in the world. By the way, this is the first time I've ever filmed something like this, and I'm very nervous that somebody's going to come up and be mean to me. Okay, thank you for watching my video. Bye. I'm in my kitchen right now. I'm pretty tired and I would like to just go to bed, but I can't because I saw a big scary bug in my room and now I'm too scared to go back. Oh, I plan to just let it use my room for whatever nefarious purpose it needs. And I hope eventually it will move on and I will be able to return to my bed. I feel like I could easily make friends with snakes. They have laws and customs that I understand, as opposed to bugs who only want to watch the world burn. While I do feel it's inherently moral to sacrifice all your worldly possessions to the great flame, it wasn't a potato bug, it was just a cockroach. A very, very scary cockroach. Nothing saying that it can't be a potato bug disguised as a cockroach. Ugh.
When I asked if Transformers was real.
Fun fact, Transformers is actually real, because when my pet hamster, Little Sour Boy, broke his leg and had to be taken to the hospital, they eventually said he went to Cybertron to live with all the Transformers. So, the more you know. I got a lot of comments about my hair, and I'm aware that it's pretty out there at times. But are you curious why I wear my hair like this? Do you think it's for style? Do you think it's for looks? Do you think I just don't like getting my hair cut? No, the real answer is when I was a kid, I was really like hyperactive and I moved around a lot. And a barber told me that if I moved around too much, he'd cut off my ears. And I became absolutely terrified of going to the barber because of that. I'm not doing a bit. That's a true story. I now know that a barber won't cut off my ears, but I got used to not going. In my very limited free time, I've been watching Downton Abbey. Why, you may ask? I ended up really enjoying the Gilded Age, and I had never seen Downton. Here is some unconnected thoughts I have about season 1. Apparently, the fandom is really split on Lady Mary, and honestly, in the first 2 episodes, I found her just awful. But then a Turkish ambassador dies in her bed, and she becomes a lot nicer. I wish she was given more to do in the show. And this doesn't make total sense, but I can tell that this is an American written by a British person. I have an aunt who behaves a lot like her. I looked at spoilers, which bums me out because she's my favorite of the sisters. I like her storyline a lot, and it took me far too long to recognize her. I also like Daisy a lot, and I recognized her role immediately. He's nice, no real notes. Also, Edith. It's a pretty decent show. I do find it funny how infantilized aristocratic people are in this show. I guess that's probably pretty realistic. Probably have a million other things I'd like to say about this show, but that's for a future, much longer video that I will probably never have time to make. I have plenty of friends. This has to be one of the most iconic covers in comics, right? Jimmy Olsen as the giant turtle man. If I'm not mistaken, and I often am, I believe it's a reference to the attack of the 50-foot woman, but are you curious how Jimmy Olsen ended up as a giant turtle man? First of all, I'd like to point out that my subscription to DC Infinite didn't include one of the most iconic Superman covers ever, so I had to secure this through other means, which was very annoying. It involves Clark, Lois, and Jimmy taking a 10-day vacation together, which is something apparently people did with their coworkers back in the 50s. And Jimmy finds an enlarging ray. A lot of Superman characters can't seem to resist firing random science rays all over the place. Gets them in trouble every time. Anyways, Jimmy accidentally gets shot with the ray as a baby turtle passes by. That's how he becomes a giant turtle man kaiju and goes on a swath of destruction. In keeping up with the Superman tradition of random stuff just happening, it turns out it was an Atlantean supervillain who's behind all of this and was mind controlling Jimmy. All in all, a pretty fun story. I love Mr. Frog. To be honest with everybody, when I watched the first episode of Smiling Friends, it was honestly a little iffy on it. I liked it, but I didn't love it, and I didn't really come back to it for a couple of months. To be clear, I like this episode now, but I wasn't in the right headspace for it. I decided for the heck of it to skip that episode and go to episode 2, and I really liked this episode. I have a weakness for dark humor and parodies of show business. It was this shot in particular that sold me on the show. So, Mr. Frog in the world of the Smiling Friends is the biggest celebrity that's ever existed. The show consists entirely of him running up to the camera, waving to it, saying, "Hello, I'm Mr. Frog," then eating the bug. And somehow this has lasted for 40 seasons. Unfortunately, Mr. Frog has to go and ruin it by trying to eat a TMZ reporter. So Charlie and Pim's case for this week is to make him smile. He's a happy and cheerful guy who has a tick of saying, "Hello," over and over again. And on a dime, he seems willing to enact terrible violence on people. Like, I don't know what it was about this shot that showed me on the show. There's just something so menacingly funny about it. Like, you quickly become aware that, oh no, he's very, very high on purple cocaine, which is both whimsical and kind of scary. And then it hits you the fact, oh, they are shooting very powerful weapons. We get a quick descent into the dangerous mind of a celebrity, a person who's used to having no consequences, now having to face them. The B story is about Gleb, the little wizard guy who gets hired by the Mr. Frog show to replace Mr. Frog. And all Gleb does is spit, but apparently that's very funny. And we meet the executive producer of the show. Now, this is a guy who's obsessed about not making the show toxic. The irony being, of course, he is the most toxic guy on the show. Mr. Frog's attempted publicity tour where he makes nice has gone totally wrong, and it's been a succession of extreme violence every which way. And he's become so toxic to the media at large that there's almost nobody who would give him a platform anymore. Except Jimmy Fallon. I remember that there was at some point in the past, Jimmy Fallon was considered a really great addition to the late night scene. I know that seems impossible to believe, but back when he took over Conan's spot at the Late Show and Conan was hosting the Tonight Show, Jimmy was considered to be doing pretty good. I remember kind of liking him, but I struggle so hard to remember why, because I absolutely can't stand him now. It doesn't help that he's just an awful interviewer and he just goes the whole time. The show really nails his like mannerisms of like slapping the desk constantly. Like there's no animation frame that goes by without him like moving or slapping the desk. It's really like just kind of great animation. You know, the show feels a lot like Gumball in a way because it has a bunch of different animation styles all merged together. And I always really like the way they use rotoscope in it. It seems to add to the humor. This is Mr. Frog's best chance to make public amends for himself. All he has to do is say the right things, be kind and courteous. He goes on a racist rant against something, and that seems to be it for him. The show's going to go on, replace him with Gleb, and he's going to fade into the background. So he makes one last-ditch effort, runs into the studio, and for the first time in Mr. Frog's life, seems to be legitimately sorry. And just as Mr. Frog is about to apologize, he runs up and says, "No, you can't do that anymore." So Mr. Frog eats and kills him, and everybody loves him again. Because the other guy was super annoying. Yes, Mr. Frog was a terrible, violent sociopath who loved to cause nothing but destruction and pain, but the other guy was really annoying. Yes, the public cares somewhat about morality and being good and all that stuff, but what they really care about is vengeance. As long as you can provide them that sweet dopamine hit of hurting bad people, they don't really care what you do. The episode ends with Mr. Frog starting an entirely new show, which he owns all of, and becoming the richest, most powerful person in the world. I think the lesson in all of this is, isn't Hollywood great?
Are you a criminal mastermind who's just had your most recent plot foiled by a detective?
Finally, I feel seen. Believe me, I have been there so many times. Would help if I could just resist the urge to call him up and tell him exactly what I'm planning to do, but I just want him to accept me. Just had a great idea. I gotta call him. Okay, bye.
No birds today have teeth.
Sir, no modern day bird has teeth. I think you're forgetting about one very important modern day bird. Daffy Dumas duck. Look at this. He has oodles and oodles of teeth. How could you forget that? He's a veteran, for God's sake. He served in several wars. It's almost like you're implying he's not real. Big Show seems like a nice guy. And he's big and tall and tough looking, which is everything you need. But there's definitely a gentler, softer side to him. He has a certain dad vibe where you can't ever really picture him young. So I was really surprised what he looked like when he was younger. Like that. Wow. Good for you, dude. When I watched the first episode of The Smiling Friends, I didn't really like it. The hopeless nihilism of Desmond that I really struggled with. And even when I binged it initially, I skipped the episode. I worked up the courage to watch it, and I really love it now. It's a pilot episode, so it's about establishing the formula and the characters. And I think it does a really effective job of that. Billy and Pym go out and try and cheer Desmond up, whose life has cratered. The first episode is really Pym trying to make the case for life and that it matters in some way. And he goes over the wide swath of the human existence, from family to friends to fun. Desmond finds no joy in any of these things. It works well as a pilot because it has the characters trying desperately justify their lives to strangers. Because the whole time this is going on, Pym is losing his faith in the pleasure of being alive. Desmond's nihilism is seeking its black tendrils into his mind. It doesn't help that Pym's family life seems absolutely awful, full of angry, violent misanthropes. When Pym tries to go out to a party to make new friends for Desmond, and everybody makes it clear that Pym is aging out of fun and joy and getting to hang around other people. And he should just be like his dad, sit on a recliner, drink beer, and yell at the TV. Charlie's fine, though. Don't worry, it all works out in the end. Desmond doesn't use his gun. He discovers a love of violence. There's these tiny little things called the Bibbles. They're like pests in this world. Desmond ends up shooting one, and he finds that the lust for battle fulfills him. Is this a happy ending? Desmond has found joy in his life by killing small animals. Listen, he's smiling, and the smiling friend's purpose in life is to get you to smile. Listen, I wasn't sure this was a ninja, but I can see clearly that he has ninja written on his headband. So this must be what a ninja looks like. Let's go further into this. Ninja. I see a ninja. And it has a little drawing of the ninja next to the word ninja. That's a ninja. It was the 80s. Ninjas were super popular. They were Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtling, and they were being surprisingly, it's the parlance of the day, spicy. So Godfrey Ho was working for a production company, and they had this kind of wild idea. What American audiences were looking for was the word ninja and a white guy. What Ho and his team would do is scour Hong Kong looking for any white guy who was sober enough to say some lines, them in front of the camera, shoot a couple hours of footage of them dressed like this. Then they would take domestic movies and cut the footage into it. We are not totally sure how many movies Godfrey Ho actually directed, but some estimates put into 138. Some even put it up to 400.